So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon, and I'm here today with Terry Collingsworth to discuss the high cost of free labor in the worlds of cocoa and chocolate. And we'll be back on the other side of this quick introduction. So welcome back, everyone, and I want to thank you for joining me and my special guest, Terry Collingsworth, who's the founder and executive director of International Rights Advocates. And so, Terry, you and I had a chance to have a wonderful conversation about 6 months ago on Clubhouse, and it was around the timing of the Supreme Court decision on the case against Nestle and Cargill. And I want to go over that again today, but what I really want to do is I want to talk about your experience, because one of the things you shared with me is you shared with me a series of photographs that you had taken when you were traveling in West Africa. And you made a really, really interesting comment, which is, for someone like you, which is, for want of a better term, a middle-aged white man, right? You were able to witness some of these things firsthand. And how did that experience, not just witnessing firsthand, but you would describe to me how easy it was to run across these things? And how did it sort of influence the way you think about these topics?
Yes, each time I've gone to Cote d'Ivoire, we have randomly driven around and stopped at cocoa plantations, which are very visible from the road. You can see the trees, and just walked in. And every single time we went upon a plantation, we saw child labor. And it was so easy for us to do. And as you noted, I don't blend in very well there. So one of the conclusions I draw from that is, if I can easily drive up randomly and every time see child labor, then it must be pretty easy for the people that work for Nestle and Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade, who are based there, who know the area way better than I do, to see this stuff. And so they're denying that it exists, or they're trying to recharacterize what it is. And frankly, I can only say one thing about that: they are lying. Now, I also want to note that each time we have gone to a plantation, I would say with about 50% of the people we interviewed, the children that we interviewed, they were also trafficked. They're from Burkina Faso and Mali. So you'll hear the new theme of the World Cocoa Federation, the association of all the cocoa companies there, that these are just kids working for their dad, or these are kids working after school, to try to legalize it, to try to make it seem benign. But most of these kids are not in school at all. Most of these kids are trafficked, and all of these kids are performing hazardous labor. I saw with my own eyes, using machetes and other sharp tools. This violates the ILO Convention 182, which all of these companies promised in the Harkin-Engel Protocol to abide by.
Well, so Terry, I think there's some really, really interesting, things that you brought up. First of all, is we have, the difference between practices on the farm that we've agreed are illegal child labor. So things which are hazardous to the health and welfare of children. And this might be things like carrying heavy loads, which we can see in this photograph here. This is going to have perhaps long-term effects on the musculature of and the bone structure of these children who are doing this. And then you have the possibility that they might be applying agricultural chemicals without either proper knowledge, supervision, or safety gear. So we have this notion of, illegal child labor. And then we also have this notion of trafficking or slavery, right? And I think that one of the nuances, or one of the areas that is a gap into which there is an opportunity for confusion, is this perhaps conflation with what is illegal child labor versus what do we mean by trafficking and slavery, right? And I don't know if this is a confusion that it's just I'm having, or it's something that you run into in the work that you're doing.
Well, the companies are sowing that confusion by trying to, again, normalize or legalize the child labor that is visible there. The U.S. Department of Labor, in their the study they released that they commissioned by the University of Chicago's NORC Institute, which came out in October of 2020. So this is a serious study. University of Chicago, commissioned by the Department of Labor. They found that 1.56 million children are harvesting cocoa today in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. Now, they did not try to break out which of those children are forced to work or trafficked, but they did break out how many are doing hazardous work in violation of Convention 182, and that is 95% of them, because all of the jobs harvesting cocoa are hazardous. You mentioned them: using a sharp machete, applying pesticides, carrying heavy loads, and the conditions under which they live. No clean water, no food, no rest break. Those are illegal under 182, whether that's your own child or not. You're not allowed to do that, period. Mm-hmm. Now, they did not break out forced labor, which I can't fathom why. One of the reasons we've heard is that it's hard. You have to spend a lot more time with each kid to determine whether they are trafficked. It is routine now that when we ask a kid where they're from or why are they working there, they will initially say something like, it's my uncle's plantation. But I have with me usually an incredibly smart and terrific translator. His name is Anjaboa. He works with Reuters and he works with other people there. He's a real expert in the field. He can spot right away the accent. So the kid will say, oh, I'm working for my uncle. And then Anj will say, no, your accent is different. You're from Burkina Faso, aren't you? And usually the kid will fess up and then they'll tell you the truth about everything else. So yeah, it takes a minute, but it's worth it, isn't it? We have to root out slavery in 2022. We have to really find out which of these kids were trafficked.
Right. So that's really, really interesting because I look when I think about the source of trafficking, right? So I think of trafficking a child from Mali or Burkina Faso into a cacao farm in Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana, or probably more Côte d'Ivoire than Ghana. What I'm asking myself is that the trafficking is a symptom of something, right? It's not actually the cause of something. And so, while we can go into the cocoa farms and identify children who are trafficked and perhaps repatriate them, for want of another term, or remove them from these difficult situations, perhaps what we can do is we can provide some restitution in one form or another. One of the challenges we have is we actually haven't addressed the root cause of why these children are being, trafficked in the first place. And so, to what extent do you think, it is the situation of endemic poverty in Burkina Faso and Mali, things which, agricultural practices which might have led to things like desertification or climate change, which have made agriculture more difficult? Do you see the need for addressing the cause as well as the symptom? Is addressing the cause as important, more important, right? Are these things that need to be done, and is anybody, focusing their attention on these?
You're absolutely right. And it's on both sides of the borders, though, that in Mali and Burkina Faso, extreme poverty is causing these kids to be willing to take risks and find work because they're hungry. They have no other options. I'm going to address that a bit more. But on the other side of the border, and this is directly something that you can hold the cocoa companies responsible for, like Nestle and Cargill and Mars and Hershey, is they're paying such a low price to the farmers that those farmers are desperate to try to get the cheap labor to put kids to work instead of adults and paying them a fair wage, or even doing the work themselves and making a decent living. So that's something the cocoa companies are responsible for and could fix. Uniformly, when I talk to the plantation owners or managers, they complain about the price that they are paid for their cocoa. It's not enough to live on. It's not enough to feed your own family, let alone hire people and pay them a fair wage. The cocoa companies, they are consistently on the same page about all of their joint lies because they're organized in the World Cocoa Foundation, and they make a plan. So one of their joint lies is they create confusion in the public's mind by saying the cocoa price is set by the governments of Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire. They don't set the price. They set a minimum price. You could multiply that by 100 and everybody would be delighted. And that, I'm not saying that's what you need to do. I think smart people have said if you multiplied it by 5 or even 4, that of course that would make a huge difference. And they could do that tomorrow. And if you press any of them on it, they will say, well, if we do it, then we'll be at a competitive disadvantage. Well, then all of you do it, and then you won't be. That's a solution on one side of the border.
And then they would get it. Then they would get attacked for collusion and price fixing.
Well, they are colluding right now by agreeing to just pay the minimum set by the government. Every time I've met with someone from the industry, they always quickly disclaim and say, we're not colluding on price. Well, you are, by doing the same thing every single year. How is that a coincidence that no one broke from the pack after all of these decades of claiming they were working on fixing the problem? No, that's a plan, that's a strategy, and that's what they're all doing together. On the Mali side or Burkina Faso side, yeah, those kids are desperate. Is that the fault of the cocoa companies? No, they're taking advantage of it and they're profiting from it. But if you are serious as the US government or the EU and claiming to be supporting this effort, part of it has to be dealing with the sources of the trafficked labor, Burkina Faso and Mali. If I have a second, I'll tell a quick story that I went to a bus station in Cacao, Mali, one of the real important trafficking jumping off points. It's a big bus station. It's the closest one to the...
Can I jump in? Is this the bus station that was visited in the video, The Dark Side of Chocolate, that documentary that Robin Romano and Mickey Mastrati did, by any chance?
It must have been, because Mickey is the person who took me there. Right, and there are photos of this bus stop on my website as well. But the quick version of the story is that I gathered up a group of about 20, 25 kids and asked them a series of questions. Did you ever hear about someone going to Côte d'Ivoire, promised a good job and never came back, or was enslaved while we're there? They said no, they never heard of such a thing. I warned them that such a thing happens routinely. We asked them where the border was. They had no idea. Then I asked them, how many of you would come with me right now? I've got a really good job for you. I'll pay you $100 after a month of work. They all raised their hand. They would have gone anywhere with just that promise. So just even basic knowledge, communication, preventive measures is lacking as well, so that these kids, it's not, if they're hungry and they're in real, having a real problem with that, they're not going to get any better off hopping on that bus. We have to stop that, period. And then we can focus on how to help them where they are.
Well, so, one of the things that's really bothered me about this whole discussion, and, this is part of the question, not the question, but this whole sort of movement that's going on, and movement may not be the right word, around the idea of gaslighting, is, one of the things that I heard, one of the things I read, Tony Chocolonely, in their defense of being removed from slave-free chocolate org's lists of ethical chocolate companies, is they talked about the notion of modern slavery. Now, I'm thinking modern slavery as opposed to what, slavery that's condoned in, Exodus and Leviticus, right? I don't know, how is modern slavery different from biblical slavery? But, do you understand what the companies are talking about when they talk about modern slavery?
You know, Clay, I've lost my temper a few times talking to the folks who've said that. I've said, have you ever met any of these kids who were trafficked? There's nothing modern about it. This is good old-fashioned slavery. They are not allowed to leave. They are told what to do. They're almost starving. They're fed just enough to keep them alive. That's slavery. And the
Mhm.
fact that it's African children
Mhm.
in 2022 makes it so much worse. I mean, there's no social acceptance of the practice anymore. When there was, that was still horrible, and I can't believe it ever was, but it
Mhm.
certainly is not today. So they are acting about as evil as you can.
So I'm just going to take a quick sidebar here. There is an article up on the Chocolate Life right now called "Gaslight." It's titled "Gaslighting Slavery," and it begins to discuss some of the issues around the industry, and featured or not featured, but very prominent people within the industry who started to backpedal. It's like, oh, for the last 20 years we've been in position. This is a gentleman. This article was written about a gentleman by the name of Nico Ruzin at Solidaridad Network. And after a long professional career of trying to deal with illegal labor in agricultural sector, around the world, not just in cocoa, all of a sudden he said, he went to Africa and there was, he never heard of anybody saying anything. And a quote in the article is, "There is no evidence of slavery in West Africa's cocoa sector." And I bring this up. It's a topic that I've been writing about for some time, trying to grab my arms around, and what I want to do is I want to point out that there are a bunch of resources that are in this article. So if you want to know about the Harkin-Engel Protocol, there's a link there. About the International Cocoa Initiative, there's a link there. And bunches of things related to that. So I just wanted to point out this article on the Chocolate Life that people can go to. So it is not a members only. It is open to anybody in the public who'd like to be able to go and take a look at the product, look at the concept. And then obviously, if you are a member, what you can do is you can comment on the article and we can continue the discussion there. But Terry, I mean, we're looking at, so is this you, right? That's in this photograph?
Yes, yes. And these children, they were trafficked from Burkina Faso. We were able to speak to them for quite some time until their overseer came, and then he wanted to know what we were doing, which is typical. But they have sharp machetes. They were climbing. Some of them were climbing up trees to reach up and chop off the cocoa pods with a sharp machete in their hands. They were doing hazardous work, but they were from Burkina Faso. So if I can find them that easily, as I said at the outset, then anyone could, and it certainly exists. For someone to say that, they must be getting paid off by the industry, or there's some kind of they have some bad intention, because it's not a disputed fact. The number of enslaved children is arguably a disputed fact.
Right, and we would make the point that even one is one too many, right? And right.
Absolutely.
But I
And
think
if there's
what
one, there's more.
that's obviously true. But I think that one of the things we're here talking about, illegal child labor and trafficking in cocoa. But I think it's also really, really important to understand that this phenomenon is not limited to cocoa. I mean, we're just focusing on cocoa because it's chocolate, right? And it is something that a lot of people love. It's something that people are in many people's daily lives, and so there's an emotional connection to it. But I know that historically, one of the things that international rights advocates has also done is looked at these issues in other areas, one of which is in rug weaving, right? And that you have been able to develop a program which I believe used to be called Rugmark and now is called Good Weave,
Correct.
which presents a positive response and a means and method by which you can take a look at and address some of the key underlying symptoms which drive right the key underlying causes which result in this illegal labor.
Yes, and for those interested, goodweave.org has a wonderful website, and This program, I'm so proud of it. I started Rugmark, now Goodweave, with Kailash Satyarthi, who got the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago for being an advocate for enslaved children in his home country of India. The remarkable thing about it is that we convinced a group of initial companies that we could help their business by allowing them to distinguish their carpets from carpets that could have been made or were made with child labor. So we created a label with a happy face on it, and we marketed that label, and it became a smashing success. All of the big stores now recognize it and are in the program, and virtually all of the reputable carpet manufacturers are also in the program. But the concept is easy. We, in India in particular, it was hard to think of how you could get all of those looms that make the carpets. They're in barns, sheds, in little villages. They're all over the place. So what we had is any company, that any manufacturer that wanted in the program, they had to opt in. They had to give us a list of their looms. We could check them against expected production, et cetera. And we charged them a fee for doing the inspections, and in exchange, they got the label. It would be so much easier in the cocoa sector, and I've offered it to the industry several times. The director.
So explain, if you can. I'm going to jump in here. Explain to me. So, we've got, Fair Trade, which has been looking to do this in the cocoa sector for, 2 decades. We have Rainforest Alliance. They can't do it. If you look at, for example, Tony's Chocolonely, who's the poster child of this, they will go and they'll say, even with our child labor monitoring and remediation system, and it's not theirs, right? It's the International Cocoa Initiative's system, right? And, they just recently joined, but it's not their system. They can identify sometimes and have the ability to remediate the problem, but they haven't been able to stop the problem. So what, and, you say you have all these looms that are in barns all over the place, but we have tens of thousands of farms, hundreds of thousands of farmers, right, scattered over 2 huge countries in this cocoa belt that extends also into Nigeria and Cameroon. I mean, it's an enormous area. Why is it easy? How could it possibly be easier in cocoa, and why hasn't it been done?
It's easier in cocoa because the plantations are outside. You can now use modern technology to be able to document where they are, get their locations on GPS, and then regularly visit them. So with the Goodweave concept, if you're Nestle, let's say, you'd have to give us a list of all of your suppliers. We would map that, and then our people would be able to get the GPS coordinates and regularly visit once you have disclosed those plantations. It's simple. The fact is that they haven't done it yet because they don't want to. This is the classic fox guarding the chicken coop. They are paying Fair Trade. They are paying Rainforest Alliance so much money that those 2 entities have become addicted to the big cocoa money. They don't want to go out of business. Everybody is benefiting from this system except the farmers and the children. So we offered repeatedly to the World Cocoa Federation or Foundation, individual companies. I explained Rugmark to them. Nina Smith, the extremely capable executive director of Goodweave, has agreed that she would come in and help set it up. But they've balked. They've said no. Why? Because they don't want someone who actually is going to be independent, looking at what they're doing, period.
Interesting. So what I want to do is I want to spend a few moments now to mention to those people who are watching, you do have the ability to post comments, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook. You can post a comment or a question. So please do. We've got a nice, thank you, good morning from Chef Jeffrey Gardner, who's out in the Los Angeles area. Also, a nice shout out from the people at Blue Spruce Chocolate in Colorado about the Gaslighting Slavery article. Thank you very much. I'm glad you like it. And an extensive quote from Juan Gonzalez, who is the founder and operator of Mabco, which is the Mexican American or the Mexican Arabica bean company out of Toronto, and who, again, is saying thank you for covering the topic. But also, what he said is interesting. That this notion of child labor and slavery is one that influenced Um, his decision not to carry West African cocoa and offer it to his customers, and not just cocoa, but also coffee, and to focus on other regions where the issues associated with child labor is not so rampant. And I don't know if you have an answer to this, Terry, but it seems to me that one way to solve the problem is to face the problem rather than avoid the problem. And is there a way to get people to encourage them to source out of West Africa? For example, could a medium-sized cocoa broker, a broker, come to you and say, what we'd like the cocoa equivalent of good weave, and what we'd like you to do, here's where we source from. Would you do this for us so that we would be able to tell the people who purchase from us that we don't have a problem in the farms that we source from?
Absolutely. We've made that offer too. We would like at least one company to break out of the pack and do it right and set a good example. And the reason they don't is they're in a collusive monopoly. They're all together in the World Cocoa Federation. No one is going to do anything to buck what the group has decided. So none of the big companies are ever going to just on their own come out, I don't think. So if we could get some smaller producers to go back to Cote d'Ivoire if they're not there, or to work with us if they are there, to show that it can be done, it's not difficult at all. And then we could scale that up if other people came in. I want to just quickly point out that because of these big companies, they've made, like Cote d'Ivoire in particular, sort of the bottom feeder of chocolate, because the good craft chocolate makers, they don't want to be associated with the possibility of the child labor, so they're going to other places. And so that gives Nestle and the others kind of a monopoly on cheap cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire, so that they can use it to make their less desirable candy bars and continue to make money. So if anyone ever did want to go into Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana and set this up, we would be very delighted to work with them.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly, happy to discuss with the people that I know about this possibility. And, one of the things that we're going to be discussing next week in our coverage of the recent International Executive Service Corps global cocoa study, as well as the study that was done in the Dominican Republic, is we're going to be talking about just how small the craft chocolate world is. So depending on how you define the craft chocolate world, and this study does that, right? They suggest that only about 0.2% of all the cocoa that is grown in the world, so 5.5 million metric tons in the last harvest, right? That the craft chocolate industry consumes around 10,000 tons, right? And so what you do is you have, at what point, is this a place where this industry can make a real difference? And, this is sort of my challenge around the use of the word fine. So the Fine Chocolate and Fine Chocolate Industry Association is you're sort of implicitly saying that, over 99% of the cocoa in the world, right? And the vast majority of cocoa farmers, their work and their lives, right, are not interesting to us because they don't produce quote unquote fine cocoa. And this language is just, really, really challenging for me. It's something that I've struggled with for quite some time. And I don't know, I don't know how you see, if we were to get, a couple of small cocoa brokers, perhaps a broker, I'm trying to think of, retaliation. I was, in a project, in Nigeria, and, if the government could take control of, 25% of all the cocoa, what would that do to the current major buyer who buys up most of it? What does that do to, upend the market? So do you see that the current market structure is an active impediment to be able to make the kinds of structural changes which are in fact required?
Yes, absolutely, because the governments are in collusion with the companies, or they would have done something about this a long time ago. There's no law enforcement. Again, if I can stroll up and see child slaves, how come the government isn't enforcing their own laws. Occasionally, they will have a little show trial, a little show arrest and trial, and pick up a couple of traffickers, which establishes, of course, that there is trafficking, and they know there's trafficking because they occasionally arrest a trafficker, but they're not doing it on any large scale. But I think a small scale model program would be extremely effective. If you consider what Tony Chocolonely could have done instead of what they did, they could have made a very effective model for how you do this right. For those who don't know, Tony Chocolonely claims to be the only company without child labor, blah, blah, blah. In fact, they're having their beans processed by Barry Callebaut, one of the biggest violators of these laws operating today. So that's a different discussion of why the hell Tony Chocolonely did that. But using the media and their clever marketing, they're all over now. You can go to any store in the US just about and get a Tony Chocolonely bar. So imagine if they had done it right, that we could have gotten behind that. We all would have said, this is how you do it, Nestle, now go do it. But instead, they're just one of the pack. They're actually a member of the World Cocoa Foundation.
Right. And for those who are interested, in my Gaslighting Slavery article, there are links to some posts that I did about Tony Chocolonely where this information is available to you. So that is a resource that you can get to. I want to get to a question from people who are watching right now. This is from Salome, who says, do you think that direct trade chocolate can help diminish child slavery in the cacao industry? And so, I don't know how familiar you are, Terry, with this whole direct trade chocolate movement, for want of a better phrase.
I could surmise, Clay, but why don't you tell me what you think it is?
Well, so direct trade is the idea that I, as a small chocolate maker, am working directly with the farm. And so it's all about reducing to the irreducible number possible, the number of intermediaries, right?
Oh,
So,
yes.
and there's also the notion that so I think that part of that is that I, as a chocolate maker, right, actually am taking personal responsibility for what's going on. And so I am actually doing my own site inspections. I personally don't think that, if you need to have logistics partners, right? And if you phone it in, you let your logistics partners do everything, you have to trust someone. And the question is, where does that trust end? Who are you? This is all about who are you going to trust? And it's about the veracity of the data that's in the supply chain, not just the integrity of the data, right? Because garbage in, garbage out, if you're not taking. So I think that, for example, if I were a direct trade chocolate maker, and what I wanted to do was to quote unquote verify, right, that what I might do is I might say, okay, good weave, let's go create good cocoa, right? And let's work together to make sure that I can confidently assert that I don't have any of these problems. I don't know if you can do that on an individual, cost effectively, right, on that sort of granular basis.
Well, first of all, I do think, yes, that would have been my speculation, but direct trade is very possible. And as you know, there's a lot of cooperatives in Côte d'Ivoire that group together a few up to, I know one that's 1,000 farms. So there are ways that you could build up easily and scale it if working with those cooperatives as well. But yes, I would really emphasize that you wouldn't really have more credibility in the market than Nestle does unless you have some kind of verification system like Good Weave, Good Cocoa. So I would encourage that. But the funny thing is that these companies, let's take Nestle again, or Tony Chocolonely, they claim to have relationships with their farmers. So they claim that they're trying to have it both ways. Like, we know our farmers, we trust them, they're our friends. And then when they're pressed, they fall back and say, well, we're 3 steps removed from that. We just buy cocoa. We're not responsible for what happens. But they're probably lying about everything they're saying about their relationships with their farmers. But it's possible to have relationships with your farmers, and that would get them invested in the process too. I really encourage people to do that.
So one of the things one of the things that I learned as a part of my research around the Tony Chocolonely issue is that, they contract with one broker trader, and that broker trader purchases only from 7 cooperatives in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, and that all of the monitoring is basically done through Rainforest Alliance certification. So, Tony's is not doing the heavy lifting on any of this. I mean, they do pay a premium. I will have to give them that. It's a fairly significant premium when you compare fair trade for what goes on. But it represents just, a really, really tiny supply chain. And when you think about what they talk about their slave-free cocoa supply chain, right? Their supply chain is actually independent of Barry Callebaut's supply chain, right? And so all they're doing is, but would they be able to sell the product that they sell at the price they can sell it for without the manufacturing prowess of a company and scale of a company like Barry Callebaut? I mean, it's another interesting question altogether. But I think that the challenge, Salome, is identifying cooperatives that are saying we're spending enormous amounts of money on Rainforest Alliance certification, right? And at most, we're able to sell 40%. That's the average. 40% of the cocoa that's grown under, a certification program actually earns the premium, right? And so, would there be a way to go about redirecting the money that we pay for Rainforest Alliance certification into some other program? But within Cote d'Ivoire, perhaps less so than Ghana, Ghana, all of the prices are set by the government cocoa board. So they look at what the world market price is. They discount the world market price by a certain percentage. And, the cocoa bod is a monopsony. They're the only buyer and seller. I mean, if I am a small chocolate maker who has a cacao farm in Ghana, I have to sell my cocoa to the cocoa bod and then buy it back, right? And at the price the government sets, right? Which makes no sense whatsoever. So, there's some real structural. I mean, you can make the argument that it is that the people, the traders in the market, the companies at the commodities exchanges in the United States and in London, these are the companies that control the prices, right? And rather than, the government of Ghana. I mean, all the government of Ghana is doing is saying that the farm gate price is a discount from whatever the world price is. Right, man. We don't have any control over what the world price is. I want to jump to some other questions from people in the audience. And so if you are watching us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, you do have a comment or a question for either myself or Terry, please put it into the comments. We'll get it up on screen and share it with people. And the next one is from somebody at LinkedIn who says that something like this, gives them a hope for change. And, I'm hoping that what we can do coming out of this is that we can continue the conversation, and that what we can do is create, some small but positive incremental steps. I think that, we're not going to be able to solve the entire problem overnight, but there are things that we can do as individuals, right, which will move the ball down the court just a little bit. And in that respect, Arcelia at Mission Chocolate down in Brazil, a good friend of the Chocolate Life Live, and does really, really fabulous work, asked the question, how can she spread the word that this, I'm assuming child trafficking and slavery and illegal child labor is a problem without naming companies or brands? Do you have any advice for how you talk about this without pointing fingers?
Well, my profession requires me to point fingers because I'm looking for accountability. But I think the other avenue to take, if you don't want to name names and brands, would be to focus your attention on the governments involved, not Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana and even Mali and Burkina Faso, but also the U.S. government and the European Union. They're supporting these fake initiatives with a lot of money. And the question is, why can't you direct those funds to a better use? And that actually helps the children and helps solve the problem. So I think government communication would be the way to go.
Right. So, Arcelia follows it up is that would one way to talk about the problem would be to talk about it by saying a price point. Any chocolate bar, that weighs, X amount, that costs under $1 should be considered to involve, um, illegal child labor or slave labor. I mean, is that too blunt an instrument?
Well, I think that you could say that any chocolate that is sourced from Cote d'Ivoire primarily, but also Ghana, is very likely to have child slavery involved in the processing. And in fact, we have filed a petition under Section 307 of the Tariff Act under US law, seeking to ban the importation of chocolate coming in from Cote d'Ivoire by the companies that I've named, but generally almost all of it. And until the companies can actually demonstrate that they're not using child labor, we want to force them to adopt a good weave type structure so that consumers could be happy in knowing that they have solved the problem.
So I think that is a really, really nice segue into the last 20 minutes of the program. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to say that this today's session is sponsored by TheChocolateLife.com. And you can go to TheChocolateLife.com. There are a bunch of articles on this topic. We've shared some of them with you today. And you can learn more about it from The Chocolate Life. And if you want to support the work that we're doing, that you can become a member of The Chocolate Life. And also, what I want to do is that if you're interested in supporting what it is that the International Rights Advocates is doing to help end slavery in the cocoa industry, one of the things you can do is you can go to this website. There's a link to this website in today's article on The Chocolate Life. So if you scroll down, there's a link. Here it is, Stop Cocoa Slavery. It will take you to this page, right? And there are things that you can do, right? Specific topics, specific links, and other things that you can follow to help international rights advocates in their fights to be able to hold the companies who have made voluntary commitments under the Harkin-Engel Protocol now more than 2 decades ago, right? Who have formed an organization, the World Cocoa Foundation, right, to marshal the efforts of the industry to supposedly solve these problems for once, who created something called the International Cocoa Initiative, right, as actually the means and method by which they will address these problems, but have not yet done so. And so if you're interested in reaching out and supporting the work that International Rights Advocates is doing, then one way to do it is to click on the link, which you will find in this story, which is the post on The Chocolate Life about today's session. Just scroll down, you'll see a link to the International Rights Advocates website and a link to the Stop Cocoa Slavery page. But Terry, I think this is a really good segue for a look at the question about what's going on right now with the litigation. So we had a case that went to the Supreme Court over the summer. The Supreme Court handed down a decision. And then about the same time, you filed an action in the DC Circuit Court, right, for Washington, DC, right? So the District Court for Washington, DC, right, under a different theory, I want to say theory of the case, under a different legal doctrine. And so, my understanding of the tactic that the industry has taken with respect to the case that went to the Supreme Court is delay, 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 right? That if actually this were to ever go to court and actual discovery might happen, then, these guys are hosed is a delicate way to go in and put that. But there is the legal theory about that case, I think, is almost a standing issue, as a jurisdiction. Right? Do we, on behalf of these trafficked children in the United States, have standing to bring these companies to suit under U.S. law, right? And the Supreme Court, as I understand it, pushed it back to the California court where it originated to solve this. But how is the legal doctrine for the DC Circuit Court different, and why does that give you more hope that you're actually going to be able to achieve a positive outcome?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for showing people how to reach us on the website. The original case we filed against Nestle and Cargill alone that went to the Supreme Court used a law passed in 1789 by our very first Congress called the Alien Tort Statute. And when we first started using that, I've used it successfully against some oil companies and so on. We caught the companies by surprise, but they all banded together, as they always do, and began getting the Supreme Court to chip away at our ability to use the law. And in our Nestle versus Doe case, they essentially killed the law by announcing a new requirement that we have to show that the focus of the activities occurred in the United States. The companies argued that it's an extraterritorial issue and the statute doesn't extend extraterritorially, so we have to show that the focus of the case is in the United States. And so I'll just, as a brief aside, the very conservative justices adopted this approach. And normally they say you can only do what the statute says. You can't impose your own will on a statute. But the statute itself is only 16 words, and they added this gigantic requirement of extraterritoriality that's not there, and they invented it whole cloth, and it effectively ended its use or usefulness to our efforts. So based on the Supreme Court's decision in Doe v. Nestle, we would pretty much have to show that Nestle and Cargill kidnapped kids from the United States and took them to Côte d'Ivoire and enslaved them. So that's how ridiculous it is. Right. The new statute that we're using is called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and it was passed initially in the year 2000 and has been amended several times after that. Mm-hmm. It was designed originally to be a criminal statute to go after sex traffickers and that kind of activity. So it was bipartisan, got a lot of Republicans involved. And with the current amendments now, there's a very broad civil claim available to the child slaves who have to show that they were either trafficked or forced to work. And we only have to show that the companies are operating in what the statute calls a venture. That's the operative term. Mm-hmm. And a venture is an association in fact or some kind of continuous business relationship. So we think we easily satisfy that by showing that the companies are knowingly benefiting from this forced labor and trafficking through their ongoing relationships with cocoa farmers in Côte d'Ivoire. Now, funny enough, again, these people, they sit around a table and they use their lobbyists and their PR machines. This case is an excellent example of how they have systematically planned to speak out of two sides of their mouth at the same time. In the public, they're saying, we're working on this, we've got it solved, the farmers are our friends, we've got all these programs, we know the farmers, they're like our family, really. And then in court, they literally said that they have no more responsibility for the child slavery in Côte d'Ivoire than a kid buying a candy bar, that they're just purchasing cocoa. So we really doubled down in this case by demonstrating through their own websites the claims they've made to show that they have this strong connection. So we're very optimistic that we're going to basically hoist them on their own petard and cause their words to be the proof of what they're doing.
Gotcha. Well, and I want, this is, something that I discovered, in the last week or so, that, the United States has this weird legal history, dating back over 100 years. I mean, so there was an amendment to the Constitution, which was put together in 1918 or 1920 or thereabouts, which was going to regulate the sale of products and the taxation of products which were made by children under a certain age, 14 or 16. And it actually made it to a constitutional amendment, which has still not been ratified. And I understand that one of the reasons why it hasn't been ratified is that we have what's called the Fair Labor Standards Act, which was enacted in 1938, which basically superseded everything that we wanted to do in this constitutional amendment. But you talk about this law that dates back to the 1700s, and there's another constitutional amendment, right, about child labor, which is now over 100 years old. I mean, this is a topic that as a nation we've been struggling with for a really, really long time.
Yes, we have. And then when you build in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which outlawed slavery in 1865, and consider that 150 some years ago, we as a country agreed that finally, at long last, that slavery is wrong and it's illegal. But in 2022, all of these multinational companies with tremendous wealth and influence, they didn't get the memo, and they're doing it to African children. I just, that makes my head explode. Like, why aren't people angry about that? Look at this kid. He was trafficked from Burkina Faso, this kid in particular, those kids, and they are slaves in 2022, enriching corporate America and European corporations. That is not only criminal, but it's just mind-boggling.
So I want to, bring a question. So somebody who's watching from LinkedIn said, "Is any slavery legal?" So in the United States, the answer is no. Right? In other parts of the world, I don't know in every country in the world whether there are statutes which prohibit slavery. But Terry, do you have this is something that is on your docket on an almost daily basis. Is there anywhere in the world where we might think of slavery as being legal?
Not that I'm aware of. And we've actually looked at that, because under the Alien Tort Statute, the operative legal term is law of nations. So we had to demonstrate that the community of the world outlawed slavery, and particularly child slavery, universally, that there's no exceptions to that rule. So I feel confident of that. And then it's also important to note that ILO Convention 182, that outlaws the worst forms of child labor, doing hazardous work, there's like 2 countries in the world that didn't ratify it. That doesn't mean that they agree that it's legal to do, but they didn't ratify it. I think Syria is one, maybe North Korea. So the United States, which rarely ratifies UN conventions or ILO conventions because they are arrogant and say that our law is better anyways, even the US ratified Convention 182. So we have the high standard of slavery, that's illegal, and then a lower bar for the worst forms of child labor, that's universally illegal. So there's no weasel exception. I will note, though, I mean, this will infuriate people who care about these issues. In the Supreme Court, Nestle and Cargill literally argued that under international law, corporations could not be liable for human rights crimes, including slavery. They literally argued that.
Only individuals. Individuals could be held accountable, but not corporations. Right.
And our
ironically, U.S. law says, enshrines corporate personhood. Right. Corporations are people. It's like, how does that work?
Well, they try always to have it both ways, of course. But our most right-wing justices, including Justice Alito, asked hypotheticals like, are you telling me that if 10 guys are enslaving children together, but if they're smart enough to form a corporation, they're suddenly immune from what they were doing? I mean, it didn't fly with even the right-wing justices. So they got shot down on that issues. But that's how hungry they are to continue to do this illegal act, which they know is illegal, and they were trying to carve out an exception for corporations of all things.
I think what's also, very, very interesting is perhaps, another aspect of this double standard. So you and I have a mutual friend, Robin Romano, who unfortunately passed about in 2012 or 2013 or thereabouts, who was the director for The Dark Side of Chocolate, but was also known for his work on a documentary around child labor in the agricultural sector here in the United States. It's called Harvest or La Cosecha, right? And he followed children who were involved in this agricultural labor under what might be thought of as conditions which are outlawed, in part because they might be illegal, the children of illegal immigrants. And so, again, another aspect of this interesting double standard is this is something that happens on a daily basis on farms, right, in the United States. Now, these children may not be trafficked, in the conventional sense, right? But when it comes to the idea of, is this illegal labor under the ILO convention, the answer is absolutely it is. And, Salome, who's writing from the Netherlands, says, slavery has officially been abolished 3 times in Dutch history, right? Yeah, they say, looking at how food and products are made, it seems like, we need to abolish it for the 4th time. And, interestingly enough, Salome, one of the things that I would say is that the Netherlands is one of the top 2 grindings countries in the world. Something like 25, 35, 40% of all the cocoa that is exported out of West Africa goes through, the port of Zaandam, just outside Amsterdam. And so, apart from the fact that it is Nestle and Cargill and Olam and all these companies, Barry Callebaut is down in Antwerp in Belgium as a port. But, apart from the fact that you have all these big companies that take advantage of this, in fact, that the Dutch, if what it is that they wanted to do, right, was to have an impact at a global level on these practices, I mean, they do have the I would guess the legal authority to police their own ports and companies that do business in their country and say, you are no longer allowed to do this. And I don't know if you have an opinion on that, Terry.
No, that's a great idea, and the companies would probably find a friendlier place, but it certainly would cause, again, a massive wave of public attention to the problem, and it would be a feather in the cap of a government that is going to stand up to the industry. I note again that we file a petition to ban the importation of chocolate that is harvested by children. And our government, we filed that on Valentine's Day 2020. So we're coming up on 2 years that we filed that, and it's just sitting there. They haven't taken any action on it. And so we're about to get a huge international community of people asking why, because it is the policy of the United States government that slavery is illegal. How come you're not acting on our petition? And my only speculation.
So is there a website resource about that particular issue that I can share with people?
It's on our website, but on February 14th, the anniversary of the original petition, it will be posted on our front page. We're going to have the letter and really make a big issue of that. So if anyone is interested in that, that would be the time to take a look at our website.
Right. And so people will be able to sign a petition, be able to contribute, send this off to their lawmakers, so you can send it off to your congressman. Okay,
absolutely.
Right. So you and I will stay in touch, and I will be able to update the post, and we'll talk about that on the Chocolate Life going forward. So Chef Gardner, who's been here since the very beginning, asked a question about 10 minutes ago, and he says, is there a list available that chocolate makers can use to stay clear of sources, right? So there are lists that say, here is an ethical chocolate company, right? And on those lists might be cocoa suppliers that we consider to be ethical. But is there a blacklist and not just a white list, to use the internet terms? These are companies you should be avoid, or is that even the way we should be thinking about it? So,
well, you know the answer as well as I do, Clay, but certainly the blacklist are the big multinationals that we have sued because they are willfully sourcing from farms that use trafficked and forced and enslaved children, and have been doing it for who knows how long. But in 2001, when they signed the Harkin-Engel Protocol, they promised to end it. And just so people know this, they promised to end it in 2005. And they've given themselves now 4 extensions of time. And they're claiming now that by the year 2025, they'll reduce by 70% their use of child labor in violation of Convention 182. Now, think about that. That is evil genius. They've essentially been given permission to keep doing it until they stop. According to them, I will stop in 2025. Well, maybe it'll be 2030. So I think all of those companies, the ones we've sued, should be on anyone's blacklist. In terms of good companies, there are a couple of sites. One of them is Slave Free Chocolate, run by Ann Riggs. She lists about 30 companies there that I'm not sure as I sit here what kind of vetting they get, but the ones that I have personally reached out to, I'm satisfied they have really ethical standards, but most of them produce in countries outside of Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, somebody asks me the question, a clay list? You know, right. And it is certainly, the challenge, I mean, it's certainly something that I would love to figure out a way to do. But, Terry, you brought up the really, really important issue, which is how do you do the vetting, right? So if I'm going to put my name to it, what that means is either I am going to have to go to every single one of these farms, right, that are in fact the source for the cocoa that is used, or I'm going to have to find some people that I trust to do that verification work for me. And it may be that some of the small scale supply chain initiatives in the world of specialty chocolate may solve the problem. We have one out of Ecuador called Origin, ORIJIN.io. There's one out of Belgium. It's called Int'l. They're all trying to address the issue of not just integrity. So that's what so for anybody, just a tutorial about this, blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, which makes it possible to see that if an entry in the chain has been modified, so you can make it incredibly difficult to make a change that is invisible. And that's the whole idea of blockchain. What it does is it protects the integrity of the data that gets entered, but it doesn't say anything about the veracity of the data that it's entered. So again, garbage in, garbage out for those people who are in the computer world. It's like if I put bad data into the blockchain now is immutable, and I got bad data in the blockchain that people will reference and say, "Oh, it's in the blockchain. It must be good." And that's a real problem.
I got to just throw in a quick story that we went to a Cargill cooperative in Côte d'Ivoire, and the manager was explaining that Cargill has distributed GPS devices that have to be attached now to the bags after they're sealed, and they can track each bag and so on. And while we were sitting there, I noticed there was a kid outside stuffing a bag of cocoa beans into a Cargill bag. And I said, well, I guess no one's paying attention to who put the cocoa in the bag, are they? And the guy's head exploded, and he had to admit that no, they don't do anything to look at how the thing is packed. But once it's on a truck, yeah, you could track it. Who cares?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, so this is actually an area of work and research that I've been doing actually since the beginning of the pandemic. Since in lockdown, I've been working with a small group of people about how do we create a system that is focused on veracity and is all about making sure that we can have confidence in the data that is entered into the system. And we've also been focusing on this notion of almost everybody is working on how do we track the cocoa. Maybe from the farm gate, but more likely the farmer-based organization, right? So cooperative. How do we track it from the cooperative to the loading dock, the receiving dock of the factory? But there's a really, really difficult challenge in tracking the cocoa that comes into the loading dock and then to the finished chocolate bar that is shipped to someone else, maintaining traceability through there. And from a quote unquote certified cocoa perspective, the whole notion of mass balance is just, it messes everything up from a traceability perspective. If you buy Rainforest Alliance cocoa out of West Africa and if there is any mass balance that's done at the port, your hope of tracing it back is exactly zero. There's no way to go about doing this. What I want to take one last question. And before I do, I want to say, Terry, thank you very much for being our guest today. We're running really long, and I appreciate your ability to spend a little more time with us today. I do want to remind people that what they can do is they can go to this website, And there is, they can go to this website in order to find more information about how to help with what it is that International Rights Advocates is doing in their current work to end child labor and slavery in the cocoa supply chain. And you can get to this page by going to the post on the Chocolate Life, which is up there right now. It's featured in the top rail. So this is the top rail. You can click on this link. It will take you to this page, right? And if you scroll down, what you'll do is you'll find this link to this website. And then what you'll also do is you'll find embedded into the page the Dark Side of Chocolate documentary that Robin Romano worked on with Mickey Mastrati. And I understand Mickey is working on another documentary that's going to be released sometime in the next month or two.
Yes, he's going to show it at the Copenhagen Film Festival on March 23rd. And it's a film about our legal case and showing the ongoing use of child slavery in Côte d'Ivoire. It's going to be great.
Great. So are you going to be there in Copenhagen with Mickey by any chance?
I am. Mickey and I and Anja Bo are all going to be there. And hopefully COVID won't cancel the festival, but they say that they're pretty sure it's going to go forward. So the movie is called The Chocolate War by Mickey Mastrati.
Okay. Well, I'm going to make an invitation today that, if you'll come back in March, perhaps with Mickey and Anji, and we can have a live stream about it and talk about the film festival. I think that would be a fabulous opportunity to continue.
Great. We'd love
what's going on. And then what I also want to do is in this story, not only do you have the links to the work that International Rights Advocates is doing, but you also have links to articles that I've written on this topic, as well as some other background resources that you can go and take a look at that. And so what I want to do now, Terry, I'm going to jump back into showing the last of the photos that you shared with me, and a final question, right? From Daniel McKenzie is there corruption at all levels of the supply chain? How would you answer that?
Absolutely, because this is happening in broad daylight. Everyone knows about it, and nothing is being done. That's the inference one would make. But I actually, I mentioned I was at that bus station in Cacao, the trafficking jumping off point. At the end of my meeting with the boys, we were shown some of the traffickers by our local guide, and then the police came up and arrested me and my photographer because we were filming, they said. And then I kind of lost my temper and said, arrest those guys. I pointed out the traffickers. They're trafficking. They're kidnapping children. And they looked at each other and sort of smirked, and they hauled us away. And then they wanted us to pay them to let us go, and we refused. So I had a book with me. It was fine. Stayed there about 3 hours, and they finally let us go. But it's small corruption and big corruption. Every politician in the cocoa belt probably is financing their existence from the cocoa sector. Do I have proof of that? No, but I've seen it before. That's how things work.
Well, one thing that I would say to this, Daniel, to sort of buttress some of what it is that Terry is saying, is that it turns out I do not believe that the government of Ghana or the government of the Ivory Coast are actually members and supporters of the International Cocoa Initiative. I know that there's a Cocoa in Forest initiative that they are also not, right, a signatory to. And so one of the reasons why these problems are not getting solved is because the full weight of the government, right, to solve these problems is not being brought to bear. One of the things that I learned in my work in writing about what Tony's Chocolonely is and is not doing, right, is it turns out that there is both a verifiable supply chain. If you look at big companies, even Barry Callebaut, Cargill, Olam, these companies are all doing an enormous amount of work to be able to map their farms. So we know where the farms are. We know the cooperatives. We know that the cooperative, for example, is capable of only producing 40 tons a year. So if they come and offer us 50 tons, we know that 10 tons is coming from the gray market or the black market, right? So these companies do in fact have some of these systems in place, right? But if Calabaut in Ghana has a license to purchase 500 metric tons of cocoa, let's just, well, that's not the whole, right? Whatever the number is, 5,000 metric tons, let's say, and they have an order book for Ghanaian cocoa of 10,000 metric tons, right? Then what they need to do is they need to purchase all that extra cocoa from other sources, right? And these other sources may not be 100% on the up and up. So while Calabaut might say, well, all of the farms that we buy cocoa with directly in Ghana, we know that they're not in forests, right, that are in national parks, right? But we can't make the same declaration about the cocoa that we have to purchase from other suppliers. And so that there exist these two markets. And because there are these two markets, the whole process of verification becomes much, much more challenging. And part of that is that the government, right, and perhaps individuals in the government, and this speaks to the corruption, Daniel, are making butt tons of money this way. I mean, I saw this, in 2010 when I was, on the island of Grenada. I wanted to help create a social enterprise in cocoa and chocolate, which would allow a non-governmental organization to be able to support their efforts. One of which was an orphanage on the island. And we were basically told by the people at the government cocoa, the Grenada Cocoa Association, that says, well, no, you can't do this unless what you do is you take this company that we don't like and you force them to come over to the dark side rather than being a beacon of light, right? And that other company being the Grenada Chocolate Company, Mott Green, before he died. It's like, why? Because, right, the inference is that they're making a lot of money. They're putting money off the top of it. It's something that I saw, when I was in Nigeria in September. Is there corruption at all levels of the supply chain? And I would have to say, Daniel, absolutely not, because there is one level of the supply chain where there is no corruption, and that is at the farm level, right? These farmers are not corrupt, right? Now, it may be the ones that are taking advantage of trafficked children. They may be corrupt, right? And so, but that represents probably a very, very small amount. Some of the farmers are using children as laborers, right? And is that corrupt? It's a fact of life. We do it here in the United States, right? Where we have children who are laborers on the family farms, right? Are they involved in dangerous labor? I don't know the answer to that question on all farms, but maybe they are here in the United States. I mean, are they corrupt? Hard to know about this. I mean, I had a really interesting conversation with Jack at Equipoise, who founded one of the founders of the Chocoa Conference. And when we think about chocolate and health in the United States, we think about the health benefits of cocoa on our diets. How good for it is in the body, and we don't tend to think about chocolate and health about what is the health of a 60-year-old cocoa farmer, right, in Ghana, right? Can they work 8-10 hours a day, 5, 6, 7 days a week? I mean, are they healthy enough to do it? And the answer is maybe not. And the only way for them to maintain their family is to get their children involved. And so our notion of what health in chocolate is something that also needs to be considered. I lied, not corruptly, but there's one more question that Arcelia has asked about this is, so what can we ask consumers to do today to begin an end to child slavery and trafficking? And I think that, Arcelia, thank you very much. I think it's a great question. It points to the heart of what it is that I wanted to get to today. And Terry, would you take us out on this?
Thank you. That is a great question. Yeah, a couple of things a consumer can do. First, don't buy chocolate from the blacklist companies, the companies that we've sued: Nestle, Cargill, Barry Callebaut, Olam, Mondelez, Hershey Mars. I think that Barry Callebaut. Sorry if I repeated any. And then go to that Stop Child Slavery card that Clay has flagged for you, and there's a place you can click on to company names. So if you stop buying Nestle, for example, They don't know why, but you can send them an email with about 2 seconds of effort, well, maybe 15, that says, I'm not buying your product until you stop using child slavery. And that helps a lot. We know that if they get thousands or hundreds of thousands of emails from people saying, I'm not going to buy your product, that's the only language they understand, money. So please help us to do that as well. And I think that'll be the beginning of a big difference here.
Well, great. Yeah, again, Terry, thank you very much. I think that's a great place to end today's session. And I want to thank you. I want to thank everybody who joined us today. And to remind everybody before we head out that this session of the Chocolate Life Live was sponsored by The Chocolate Life. And so if you'd like to support the work that we're doing here on The Chocolate Life, in addition to the important work that IR Advocates, International Rights Advocates is doing, then please go to thechocolatelife.com and become a member. One quick note is that next Friday at this time, we're actually going to be starting at 10 o'clock Eastern time because my guests are in the Netherlands. There are two of the principal instigators or investigators on the recent research that was being funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and managed by the International Executive Service Corps. I did a session last Friday where I talked about my reading of these two reports, and we're going to be going over my reading and some of the things that can be done with those two reports. There was the USDA, there was a global cocoa study. So let's look at the world market for cocoa and chocolate and some really, really important indicators. And then a country study that was done on the Dominican Republic. And that's going to be next Friday from 10 o'clock, not noon, just everybody heads up on the schedule change. And then I also want to say that beginning in February, I'm going to be adding Tuesdays to the list. So I'm doing a live stream on Tuesday, which is going to be featuring on individual personalities. So we're going to be talking about chocolate makers, cocoa growers. We're also going to be, dogs in the background, love that. Yes. I woke up and decided to join the conversation. But we're also going to be looking at critics and authors and bloggers as a part of that, looking at individuals on the Tuesday session. And then Friday session is going to be looking at topics in chocolate, whether it is this one on child labor and trafficking, whether it's about ethical sourcing, about production, whatever it's going to be. And so beginning in February, we're going to be doing 2 days a week. And if you can, and you should, is that what I do is I maintain a calendar on the Chocolate Life. You can go there. Again, it's on, this is called the top rail. If you go to the top rail and click on the Chocolate Life Live calendar, here are the upcoming streams. So here are the sessions. So today's session, what we've got going on for the next couple of weeks. And then there's an archive to all of the historical live streams. You can click on these and it will play the entire stream, which is hosted on YouTube. Right. And thank you very much. And I look forward to everybody contributing. Thank you very much, everybody. Again, Terry, looking forward to continuing the conversation and all success to the work going forward. Cheers.
Thank you, Clay, and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
It was a huge pleasure.